Hi, this is Mana. You are going to listen to an interview I just did with Thomas More, and I thought that it would make sense to just say a few words to you before you're going to listen to it. I was so excited because Thomas More is, to me, a genius. He's got his sun in the 11th house. I'm not saying that everyone who has a sun in the 11th house is, but I am saying that combined with all of his earth, he can do so many, he has so many artistic talents, and he's so well-rounded in different disciplines. And then when you read his books, it's like, for me, worlds are opening up, really. And I had taken so many notes from what I've read so far of him that, of course, I didn't have time to to go through all of that. And what you'll hear is, I think, I don't know what you're gonna hear. Like, you're gonna hear what you're gonna hear. That's completely up to how you look at this world and how you interpret. But just from my point of view, what happened was me trying to understand also his terminology. So I didn't want to ask him two straight up questions like define ego, define soul, because he's given many interviews and he's written so many books, so I kind of want to ask a little bit different. So I asked quite directly about different quotes. I think at least that was my intention. Right now I'm not sure if I did, but my intention was to ask him about directly words from his first book, which is the one that I'm reading currently. Sometimes what I said, and of course partly it's because I'm nervous, and it's partly because English is not coming out so fluently, and then when I'm nervous it's getting completely mixed up, and it probably would too in Danish. But also if I even could articulate what I meant, then I think it's still, the answer would be similar, because I'm trying to understand his approach, and then it takes a while before you meet each other in that and have that dance. In the end, I, for example, ask about ego, and I felt with his answer that I just need to dive deeper into his terminology and his way of looking at the world in order to really get this. So I think you can hear some nervous tension in the beginning, and then I think that it loosens up. That was my inner experience anyway, that in the beginning, I was also really concerned because it's been a long time since I did an interview online, and I'm just nervous. Is the sound going through, and am I, it's just all of these things. And my script, of course, didn't at all work out, because we just started completely somewhere else than what I had planned. So there was all of that going on, and then he had also told me that he had this quite tight deadline. So I was like, oh, okay, that means I'm gonna ask you a third of these questions. Great. So all of that made me a little bit nervous, and then I think it lined up, and I was really aware of staying in my own body and taking care of myself while being in awe, while being so happy that he was here, and while wanting to make a good interview, because of course I want to bring you something that you think is quality and that you will like. So, but I hope the reason why I'm explaining this is because it's so common, right? That we have, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, but it could be that you can use it also. That I want these things, and then the consequence of that, or the effect of that, is then I have to suffer. And we even talk about this. Then I have to suffer. Then I have to restrain myself. I have to tighten up. I have to pretend in a way that I don't need air, that I don't need to breathe. And I want to step away from that. And this is the birth. So I'm new now. I birthed myself in a way. So I'm new and I'm learning as we go, but this is my intention. And I'm partly saying this to to take. It's kind of serious now that you know, right? Now I have to follow through, but it's also because I want to make a change in this culture of interviews where it can seem that you can only do it if you have everything together. I can also be here even with my nervous system. I can be here as the real me, and I don't have to overcompensate in order for it to look a certain way. Raise your hand if you're with me. Okay, that's all from me, and the next thing here is the interview, and that's it. So I just hope that you get some insights out of this, and please send me an email if you have any questions or comments. I'd love that. You are listening to Therapeutic Astrology Podcast TAP, and today I am so honored to be together with a very talented author, therapist, musician, PhD, Thomas Moore. Thank you so much for being here, Thomas.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I don't get a chance to talk about astrology very often.
This is your chance. This is your big chance. Just to introduce you a little bit more, I really recommend the listeners to go to your website, thomasmoresoul.com, because that has really helped me to see your bibliography, all of your books. You have your new book, Eloquence of Silence, just now. But what I actually did was just feel in my heart, what book did I want to read first? And I've made this prioritized list for myself. And I've heard also your best-selling book, Care of the Soul, on audiobook. And there are many options, so I just recommend listeners to go into your website and look at what you've written, because your titles are so soulful, if you will. And it calls you. And I read this quote in your book, The Planets Within, which is the one that I'm reading now. It says, "Truth of the soul follow a different clock." So I think that's what I'm doing with reading your works in a different order. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's fine with me. I don't have much of a sense of order from one to the next. Even with a book, when I write it, my editors are always complaining because they want to rearrange the chapters, and it's fine with me. I don't think of it. I don't think of them in order.
Right. But isn't that also what you do and what you have been involved with all of your career? This, we could call it the elixir of life.
Yes, of course, yes. And the thing is that I write about soul, and it's an ancient idea. It's not a new idea at all, and I think it's a very important one. I know it's been picked up and used in so many different ways in recent years, but I stick to the traditions. I always go back to the traditions, and I think it's an important word. And one thing about it is that the soul, when you think of it, is like an other. It's not you exactly. It's like an other in you. It's like you can talk about my soul as though it were something slightly different from me, although it is part of you in a way, or it's the source of who you are. And the soul works differently than life does. And this is a bit difficult to get used to. So that's when I talk about a different time, even different timing, the soul, I think, has a different clock than life does.
Right. And do you mean then, when you say life, do you mean like society, or do you mean soul opposed to what? Soul opposed to what we could call hardcore reality, a soul? Do you understand my question?
I understand your question, but I don't know if it's answerable.
No.
So what I mean when I say life, what I mean is that when you live your life and you're trying to deal with your day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's it. Day-to-day life.
That's a different focus than if you're trying to focus on your soul.
Yeah.
And it's not that the soul is inward. That's not really totally true. It's partly true, but It's that the soul is a different thing. It's different and it's bigger than who you are, and yet it's the source of your life at the same time. So we can
Yeah.
talk in such a way that our soul efforts, the care of the soul, is different from how to get along in life. They're related, but they're different.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I my intention for this conversation is to have this deep that we're already going into about some deeper issues than maybe many of us are able to have in normal life. But it can go in many directions. I just in the introduction here, I also thought to bring up this quote you have from. And you just mentioned to me before we started recording that you haven't read your own book in was it 30 years?
Yes,
This
probably.
yeah, this is the one that I'm going through now, and I'm so pleased about it. I really, really, it's so good, and I'm taking my time with it because of that.
Right.
It's so full. But on page 74, you say that the immortality granted by this elixir of spirit is not unending physical life or life after death, but life outside life itself, the life of the soul that transcends personal biography and the limits of ordinary time. I think that's kind of what we're talking about right now.
Yes, it's not an easy concept for a modern person because we are so influenced by a materialistic view of the world. We don't even know, I think, how much we are brainwashed into thinking
Mm,
that the world can be explained with telescopes and microscopes and visits to Mars and microscopic studies and quantifications, quantifying everything. There's another world altogether that people of the past were very good at. And I think we tend to look down on people of the past because they were not materialistic and they were not scientifically sophisticated. That doesn't
mm,
mean that they were not sophisticated in other areas that actually might be more important to our lives than the materialistic ones of today.
yes, this is when you speak about it, and when I read your books, it's like calling me. Do you know this feeling like, oh yes, I need more of this? And you even have a chapter called The Necessary Madness. And I was like,
Yes.
yes, yes, that's what we need. So I don't know. You also have this term called the astrological consciousness. Do you have like? Can you say something about that? Not maybe you don't have to have a clear definition or anything, but just
Sure.
what are you speaking about when you say astrological consciousness?
What I mean let me put it this way, that if you were to look in history and see how people lived and thought, let's say before 500 years ago, let's say before 1500, uh, the 14th, the 1400s were very important in Europe and other parts of the world as well. It's like the world changed at the end of that century. 1499 was the year that Marsilio Ficino died. He's one of the main characters that I study from Florence. And 1499 is kind of the end of a large chapter in our experience. So up until that time, and of course in some areas afterwards, people naturally thought about the stars as having some importance to our daily lives. And I don't think they were as naive as we think. They weren't just saying that the planets controlled us in some magical way. I don't think that's it. They were more sophisticated than that. But when you look at the lives of artists and interesting thinkers over those centuries, whenever they wanted to do anything, they consulted an astrological chart first to decide when to do something. When you study alchemy, for example, which is another cult or mysterious practice, um, the when you study that, the alchemist is told that you must begin and end your operations according to the stars. So you have to find out what's happening in the sky. That is a very interesting thing, that we could live our lives in relation to the sky. That would be a wonderful way to be in tune with nature, with the world that we are part of, and to know something about those planets. Now, they have been in Europe, especially, and in the West, they have been described in terms of Greek and Roman mythology. That doesn't mean that that's essential, but it does help us to call one planet Jupiter. And then we have the whole mythology of Zeus and Jupiter to think about with that planet. And so it's not just a simple having a key word for the planet, one word, but rather we have a whole vast, subtle, extensive mythology that has been explored through painting and through writing for centuries. So it's very, very rich. But the point is, what I wanted to say is that an astrological consciousness is simply an awareness of the sky. Some people today might be aware of a full moon, and that a lot of people feel, I think, that the full moon has an impact on them, that they feel it mysteriously. It's not how much light is coming into you, but there's something about the full moon that is mysteriously effective, that it really does affect you. And in astrology, I also pay attention to clouds, not just to the planets. Whatever's in the sky seems to me to be astrological.
Right.
And so I like to notice every day to notice what the clouds are like, because I know that my mood is going to be affected by them. This is exactly what Ficino says in the 15th century. He says that you look at the sky and the effect on you is going to be similar to if you live like he did in this small city state. It's going to be similar to the mood of your leader. If your leader is in a bad mood, you're going to have a bad day. And he says it's the same with the sky. If the sky is dark, you're going to have some difficulties. If it's bright, it's going to be very different. So that's what I mean by an astrological consciousness, how the sky affects us.
Right. Interesting with the clouds. And what I'm getting as you're speaking is this larger awareness of something larger, our larger context of us, rather than just my own little narrative. And also something you speak about in the book is that we have a tendency to base everything on the past. Do I
Yes.
understand that correctly with the thing about being so related to the past? Also, you speak about this nostalgia, and it was more authentic back then, but then actually that's a sign of just us wanting to be in touch with something now.
Yes. Yes. The past is always now.
Yeah.
We tend to think of it materialistically, like a recording. That when we talk about the past, that we're talking about something that happened long ago. But actually, if you accept the idea that we can't know anything without our imagination being at work, then this is what we mean. And people I work with, we call it archetypal psychology. Really, or imaginal psychology, meaning that the imagination is always at work in anything we do. It's a little bit like what physics was saying many years ago, that the fact of physics is affected by the person who is expressing it and who is studying it. And in that way, everything we do and say about the past, or about anything for that matter, is affected by our current imagination. So it's made present. It's not literally past. It's made present by our imagination today.
Right. Right. So it's not just seeing ourselves in a larger context, but also ourselves, seeing our filters in a way, and maybe opening up our higher filters. You talk about the soul that the higher parts of the soul can be dormant in us, or are dormant in us, until that imagination awakens.
Yes, there's a great deal that is dormant. I like the word dormant. Like I've studied Carl Jung very thoroughly over the years, and so Jung tended to use the word unconscious. At least that's the word we get in English for it. And it's not as good a word as dormant, I think, because unconscious doesn't say much, really. It's not conscious. Yeah, that's true. That helps, I guess. But it's dormant is different. That means that it is present but asleep
It is
and
sleeping.
yet to be wakened into our life. And I think part of the work of astrology is to wake us up to things that are happening that we don't see because we don't have either the language or the technology for it.
Okay, so I have to ask you, when you speak like that, how astrological you are, because in this book it's from 82, right?
Well,
Uh,
I wrote it in the 1970s, yes, but it was published in 82, I think.
okay, so yeah, I think it says 82. But I was confused because then on the cover it says author of Care of the Soul, and I was like, but that's later. So I'm completely
That was only no, that is the paperback was published several years after the hardcover edition was published. So this paperback that you have there was published after Care of the Soul. And
right,
that's why that's there.
right, okay.
That's not the original 1982 book.
Right,
No.
but it's the same. It's the
The
same
same
content.
book with
Yeah.
there were a lot of typos in it too it was published by University Press at the beginning. And it was my first book. And
Yeah.
they did not do a good job, and there are a lot of typos. And I would love to have somebody one day publish it without them, but at least it's out there.
Yes, and I haven't noticed.
Oh, good.
But that's because I'm not
I
English
noticed. I
native.
noticed. Yeah.
Sure. But in this, you make a clear point that you don't take astrology so seriously. I feel you have several disclaimers around astrology. And even you also reference to Ficino that he has some critique of astrologers, but then also, like you said, he also used astrology for finding different moments
Yeah.
in time. So I'm just curious if it also had to do with the time that you were publishing the book in, that you had to make those disclaimers, or how do you
Yeah.
feel about astrology now?
Well, part of it is that uh, I well, there are a number of reasons for those things, those disclaimers. I would not make them now. That's why if I
Okay.
were to redo that book, I would take the first thing I would do would be to take those out.
Oh,
And but I think, and I'm looking back. I mean, this is just a guess, but I'm looking back. I think I was a university professor at that time, and I don't think I felt that if I was too identified with astrology, that my university authorities would approve of it. In fact, in the end, they did kick me out. They did, they did fire me
because of that?
because, well, not because of that
Okay.
alone, but because of my interests in things that they
Mm,
felt were not purely academic.
right.
And I was denied a Fulbright scholarship once because of my studies in Jung. So, people are sensitive about these things, especially in the university world. So I think maybe the disclaimers were there possibly for those reasons. On the other hand, I think I probably had my doubts at the
Sure,
time
sure.
too.
Yeah.
I was thinking more of, I really wanted to see astrology as a system of the imagination, but I've changed my mind about all of that. I mean, I did a long time ago. So I'd like to get rid of those things. I was hoping you wouldn't bring them up.
Interesting. No, I'm happy to know that. But I was like,
Yes.
when I was reading it, I was like with you. I was like, even with all of these disclaimers, like even if it's not true, even then still we can use astrology, even if it's not, we don't know how it's connected, basically.
No, we don't know.
So,
No, it's wonderful. Astrology it's like alchemy and many other in dreamwork. It's it is looking at images that clearly, mysteriously relate to our lives, and you can't really explain them. Any attempt to explain them according to modern thinking is, it just doesn't work.
right.
And if you can't do it according to modern thinking, many people will dismiss it.
Yeah.
But I think that now I feel that these mysteries are there, and that it's like I went to I was having some heart problems once, and I went to a doctor from India, in the United States, but trained in India,
Uh-huh.
very revered doctor, and I was concerned about my heart, and he looked at my palm and he said, "Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Oh.
Let's talk about other things." And And I thought, and I put my trust in that. I think there are mysterious things in this world that we don't
Right.
understand, and I think we can live with those. And astrology is one of them. It's hard to understand how an astrologer can give you such insight into your life and into a prophetic sense. And that reminds me of something else I might mention now, that
Mm.
I feel that part of becoming an intelligent person, it would help if you could develop your sense of prophecy, if you could become more prophetic in your life, if you could really have a good sense of what's happening so that you could make excellent prognostications about the future, excellent foretellings, a sense of prophecy. So I think a good astrologer probably has that inborn skill. And I wish that we all could develop it as just a natural thing, something very natural that would really help our getting along in life.
I was wondering about that with the prophecy, because it's part of that chapter I mentioned, the necessity of madness. And it's, I mean, you say prophecy, but could it also just be intuitive knowing? Or is it on a higher level what you're speaking about?
Well, I'm hesitant there because I don't want to rationalize or take away the mystery.
Right.
So when you use, I can understand the impulse. I fall into that myself constantly, where I realize I'm talking to people who I don't want them to dismiss me too quickly. So I might say, well, this is like an intuitive sense, but actually I
Mm,
don't mean that. I think that it's more than that. There's more mystery to it, and I
right.
think that we as human beings have powers that we don't understand and haven't developed because we've been so externally directed.
Yeah. Ah, yeah. Okay, great. So you are actually talking about, so prophecy, could it be translated with channeling?
I think well, they're two different things. They're
Right.
two very different things. So I don't know if I don't like to relate things too closely together that are different. I'd like to keep prophecy, and channeling.
Okay, good.
So I can't really say it would be a parallel or something similar to channeling because I don't know much about channeling. You have to
Right.
talk to somebody else.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I could say that there are certain things like working with dreams that are very, very effective,
Mm.
especially in regard to life. That bridge
Ah.
between dream and life you can work that and
Mm.
really gain a great deal from it. Although you can't prove anything, and it can be frustrating to be. If you read current articles on dreams, most of it's about REM sleep and putting electrodes on the brain and so on. That kind of neuroscience approach. But there's another side to it that I like, and that is the art of dream work, of actually developing this art. The people in the past referred to alchemy as the art and their art. And I feel the same about astrology and dream work. They are both arts.
Ah.
They are arts of working with the mysterious powers that are in life and available to us, but they are not available or accessible to us if we are stuck on this materialistic view of the world.
Right. So when you mention dream work, it's related to prophecy, right?
It's connected in the sense it's similar, that
Mm-hmm.
with prophecy, you see signs and you want to say what the future is. With dreams, there may be dreams that some dreams seem to have a prophetic element in them, but not always.
No,
I would say not usually, but sometimes they might.
sometimes I might. Yeah.
So that's when the prophecy
Mm-hmm.
idea might come through. That skill might come through with dream work.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, dream work is its own thing. And it may not be prophetic, but
Mm-hmm.
it may offer many other opportunities.
Yeah, I started some years ago writing, having this daily practice of writing my dreams down, and it's like I can remember a lot of things, but it's peculiar to me how there's always this sense that there's something that cannot get through into this in through me, like my consciousness or my conscious being. I can't. It's not possible to translate it. Do you know that feeling?
Yes, I think that's part of every dream. My feeling is that every dream I hear, at first it seems totally unintelligible.
Yeah.
But then after a few minutes of, I would call skillful exploration of the dream, it begins to gradually over time really, really make sense. Now, I've been using dreams in my practice of therapy for 40 years.
Wow.
And I decided many, many years ago when I was writing The Planets Within to become good at working with images. That was my goal. And so over these years, I feel that I've really developed that skill of working with a dream. And now when I hear a client's dream, it doesn't take long for that clarity to appear. And by the end of a session, working, letting the dream be present. I don't focus, just say, let's find out what this dream means, but just letting the dream be present in our conversation and referring to it regularly. I find that the dream gives us insights that would not be available any other way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love reflecting upon my dreams too, but it definitely takes some. I'm gonna need some years, to practice figuring out the exact
It takes
meaning.
time.
Yeah.
It takes time. You have to understand that, I think, that these are not easy things. And
Mm.
you can't take a course in dream work and then suddenly become an expert.
No.
It takes time because you have to get to know how dreams work, and it's very subtle, and more experience with them. Just like, my father was a plumber, and he always had apprentices working with him. These are young men and a few women in those days who would come with him and learn how to be a plumber just by being with him. And I think there's something similar to the dream work. It's like the learning is more, it's not direct. It can't be put down in rules and statements. It comes through association with someone who knows how to do it.
Yeah. I'd love to follow you around, Thomas, to get a sense of that. But you say about dreams that they are expressions of the secrets of the psyche, and that it blends uh, three parts of time together. It melts three times parts of time together. Can you say something about that?
Um,
If you remember 30 years ago. This is from that book.
I don't think I can,
No.
but I could say that now the first part you said, the dreams.
Yeah, that
Did you say that again?
yeah, that they express the psyche's secrets.
Oh, the secrets. That's right. That's
Yeah,
good. I like that.
yeah.
Uh,
You wrote it.
yeah, I don't remember that though.
Oh.
But yes, the secrets of the psyche, because I think that's a good way to put it. There are secrets. That means that there are things going on in the psyche that is deep within you, if you want to put it that way. But the psyche moves beyond you. And so there are secrets there. That means that there are there are certain patterns, there are certain rules of life, you might say, that are there that you have to discover. And it takes an open mind and it takes some knowledge to be able to have access to those secrets. And I feel that going back to being a psychotherapist, which the word means one who cares for the psyche or soul.
Yeah.
Psyche, therapy means care. So care of the psyche. If that's what you're doing, then it is not about life. Psychotherapy, but from the word itself, is not about life. It's about the psyche or the soul.
Right.
So if you're actually doing psychotherapy, that means you're focusing on the psyche, then you want to know its secrets. It's hidden rules and expectations and the patterns that it gets into that ordinary people would not probably see because they're looking on the surface too much. And if you can, I think this is what astrologers and alchemists do. They call their work hidden, or occult means hidden.
Yeah.
So they're occult arts, which is fine. It's gotten a bad reputation, but occult is a very good word, meaning hidden. And the hiddenness of the material of these arts is real, and it affects our lives and our cultural lives as well. Um, and so we need people who can have access to those secrets.
Yeah. That is my deepest longing to, and that's why it's so important for me to speak with you, because we can find so much in what you have written in your work. So I just want to give you. I'm so grateful for that, because in our culture, in our society, and when we have to think about also just surviving, it's undervalued, right? Imagination, fantasies, all of that is undervalued.
Totally.
And I was wondering if you could say something about Ficino's approach to psychotherapy. You mentioned a little bit about therapy here, but specifically Ficino, I feel like I mentioned channeling before, but a lot of him like comes through you, right? In some way,
Yes.
through studies, but
Yes.
still, yeah.
So let me just say a word about him. Uh, Marsilio Ficino, he lived from 1433 to 1499. So that means most of the 15th century in Europe. He grew up and lived almost his whole life in Florence or just outside Florence. And there's a lot of controversy these days among historians about what he was doing exactly, but I think it's pretty clear that some of the facts are clear that Cosimo de' Medici, who was the prevailing leader of that area around Florence at the time, uh, was a Renaissance man. He was very interested in ideas and new thought, and especially new ideas that came from the past, like from the Greeks and Romans. Today we think, well, we have all these works of Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus and all these great authors of the ancient past. But in those days, they didn't have access to them. They didn't have the books and they didn't have the translations. So in those days, the scholars could read Latin, but they couldn't read, most of them could not read Greek.
Right.
So Cosimo asked Ficino's father, who was a physician, if he would agree to educating his son in these languages and in these ancient texts to the extent that they could. And so he agreed to that. And so Ficino became very proficient at Latin and Greek, and also as many ancient texts as were available. And during that time of his getting older and doing his work, Cosimo was sending people out to various parts of the world to simply just to get books, to go to monasteries and bring books back. And often the books they really were interested in were the Greek books. And I don't want to go on and on about this, but I'll say one more thing. There was a council. I wrote about this. I think there was a council of Christian bishops and who came from Greece to Italy to have a great meeting to try to heal the divisions between East and West there, between the Greeks and the other Europeans. And they brought their theologians with them, and they brought their scholars, and the scholars brought their books. And so the people in Florence Cosimo got all these books that he just loved and wanted, but they were in Greek. So he'd give them to Ficino to translate. And Ficino was not only good at translating, he understood the texts very well. And he wrote commentaries on these texts. The texts that he wrote about in some of these early Greek texts were Platonic. They were based in Plato, but at the same time, they had magic in them. And also, apparently, Ficino got a hold of what's called the Corpus Hermeticum, which is a collection of little books that have magic in them, a lot of curses and blessings and magic of that kind, and astrology.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got these books, and Ficino was heavily influenced also by the Islamic writers, who also they were finding the texts. And he had a particular book called what's it called? De Radi Stellarum, I think it's called, on the stellar rays. The book was called Stellar Rays by an Islamic scholar called Al-Kindi. And when you read Ficino's book on astrology, you find him quoting Al-Kindi so much. It's almost that he was, as you were saying before, he was channeling Al-Kindi. And it's more Al-Kindi than it is Ficino to some extent. But Ficino put Plato and Al-Kindi together. And Al-Kindi was writing about the rays of the planets, how they come into the earth, and they bring power to the earth itself and to people. And so he said, for example, one planet, you get to know that planet by the color associated with it. So the planet of Venus has a certain shade of green that is very important. And if you have any objects in your possession from on the earth there, if they have that color, that means that they have been impacted by the Venus planet. The rays from the planet are coming down and being absorbed by this green thing, like to like. That was the idea. Mm-hmm. Similar color. You don't have to take this literally. This is not physics. This is how they imagine getting the power from the stars, from the planets. And that was Ficino's whole idea, borrowing Al-Kindi and developing this particular kind of what he called magia naturalis, natural magic. Natural, not supernatural, natural magic. And so as a therapist, what Ficino would do if someone comes to him and says, I'm really depressed, what can I do about that? The first thing he would do would say, well, why don't you get, and he says this, I'll give you an exact example. He says, get a piece of amber and put it on a yellow ribbon and put it around your neck. And that amber will absorb rays from the sun because of its color. And the solar influence will offset the Saturnine image you have of depression, the dark colors of Saturn. Or, he says, if you really want to deal with it, what you should do is wear black and get into depression and get into Saturn and go deeper into him and work it through him rather than just find a way out of it.
Oh, that's so interesting. The Saturnine image, the image you have of Saturn. Yeah. I think it's also in Care of the Soul you mentioned Saturn, right? It's
yes.
Because you have this point that it's not, we have to also look at the dark side, and it's not only negative. Depression is not only negative, almost, you say, right? Yeah.
That's right. There's a chapter there called Gifts of Depression. With that idea, yes. And that was exactly taken right from Ficino to some extent.
Right.
through my friend James Hillman, who also developed that
Yes.
idea.
Oh, uh, Thomas More, I have so much more um, to ask you. And you mentioned James Hillman. I've actually looked a bit at your birth chart together, um, but I have a few more questions before that.
Okay.
I'm just getting nervous because of time, but we'll
I know there's a lot to talk
there's
about
so
when we
much.
get into
Yes.
this. Forgive me for going on and on, but I just get,
Yeah,
I'm very interested in all these things.
I
It's
love
like,
it. You cannot go on too much. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. I love
okay.
it. Yes, especially now that I've read so much of you. It's like it's so nice to hear your voice as well. Um, okay, so I've taken a note on that the approach that Ficino's approach to psychotherapy is also about living, activity, pleasure, and contemplation.
Hmm.
That's like three, four. No, there's three fundamental forms of living: activity, pleasure, and contemplation. That's what it says.
Yes, that's right. That's what he says. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And you, when I've heard you speak, you often have this point about pleasure.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, part of, I get that idea partly from, I think it's in my nature. Just, I think I was born with that philosophy that pleasure is important. But I get it also from the Greek philosopher Epicurus, from whom we get our word Epicurean.
Yeah.
And he's often misunderstood as being someone who's a hedonist who wants only pleasure and kind of losing yourself in entertainments and, I don't know, debaucheries. Um, but that's not him at all. Epicurus was very moderate in his pleasure. The most important pleasure, he said, was friendship, the pleasures of friendship.
Mm.
So that should give you an idea that he's not talking about just eating too much or drinking too much, although eating and dining were important for him as well. They're one of the great pleasures of life. And Ficino was an Epicurean, at least for a while. Apparently, he gave that up. I don't know the whole story, whether he was kind of forced into it, but he
Mm.
gave up the idea of speaking for Epicureanism. But he was an Epicurean in his writing for a while.
Okay.
And I read that and I felt, so I went and read Epicurus rather closely. And I was convinced that I thought, yes, this is absolutely right, that pleasure is more important in life than we think. That a lot of people think that you should deny yourself and, no pain, no gain kind of philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think that's right at all. And personally, people realize that I've written 30 some books and they say, you must be very disciplined to write all those books. And it doesn't work for me. I'm not disciplined at all. That's
Really?
not why I write the books. No, there's no discipline at all. I'm very undisciplined, but I write them for pleasure.
Mm.
Pleasure is my goal and the thing that keeps me going in that work. I love writing, so I write what I want to. I'm in a position, fortunately, where I can write pretty much what I want, and so that's what I do. I write for pleasure, and that's Epicurean. It's part of the Epicurean way. And I think that that's very soulful. I think it's very much part of the life of the soul, that the soul works for pleasure, and there's something else in us that feels it's good to suffer and to suffer through your work and be so disciplined. I don't like it. I have nothing to do with that.
Oh, I feel really tempted to ask you about our current labor market, or the way that we work. And I know it's a very general thing to say because we are in different countries, even. But I think there are some similar things. And right now, I'm applying for jobs, and I was just at a job interview yesterday, so I have it very much in my mind. And how rigid and how narrow it just is, that kind of setting where you there are different job interviews, luckily, but this one was very rigid, and it was very like critical, trying to scare off me, the applicant for the job. And because I had that experience, and I go home and I read your stuff around imagination, and I see the contrast there.
Entirely different.
Yeah,
That's what I mean by care of the soul,
yeah.
by a more soulful approach. The other thing is, it's kind of, if we were to, take a long time to explore it, we'd think that there's something in common between churches and job interviews. There's a
Oh, that's good.
kind of a religious habit of making people feel bad about themselves and judge themselves and be very moralistic. That's
Yeah,
in our culture. It's very deeply ingrained in our culture. I don't think it comes from religion. I think it got into religion from some other place too.
right.
It's kind of in the air, and so for some people, a lot of people feel pretty good if they can suffer. That's called masochism.
Yeah,
When you enjoy your suffering. But we see a lot of that in the world, and that easily then invites sadism, which is trying to make other people suffer. So that's another. I've written a book about that too, called Dark Eros, about
right.
sadomasochism, because I think it is part of our culture and our life, and that's why I think pleasure is so important. That it counters that sadomasochism that's at the root of much that goes on in modern life.
Yeah, pleasure. And when I hear you say friendship, that's also to me like contact, because that's what I want in that kind of situation. Even if I accept, okay, we can't be all authentic because we are at a work and there has to be some kind of boundaries to that. But then at least let me feel you in some way, that you're here and that you're seeing me, and it's not just so formal that this is what you say to everyone. I think that's the longing that I felt at that moment.
It would be a different world if we could do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
a different world. Now, I'm trying to, I'll
Yeah.
give one example. I'm trying to do this. I'm teaching an online course. I've been doing it for 3 years called Soul Psychology.
Ah,
And, it's my own course. I teach everything that I'm interested in. And I've made a course where there are 36 meetings. And I tell people, the beginning, I say, my goals are friendship and pleasure. That's what I'm looking for here, in terms of the style of this course.
yeah.
Those are my principles, friendship and pleasure. That means we do things in a friendly way.
Yeah.
And we maybe even move toward becoming friends. Maybe not, but at least we try to keep the friendliness there. And we look for pleasure, the pleasure of learning something, the pleasure of reading something. So I give very short readings, but very focused so that people can read something and read these readings for a week session in a half hour. But there's a lot there, a lot in them.
Mhm.
And people come to take these courses and they say, well, how much reading do you require? Will it be several hours a week? I mean, I tell them right away, I said, this isn't school.
Ah,
We're looking for pleasure here. We're not looking for pain.
yeah.
So don't ask me about pain. There will be no pain here as far as I can
Mm,
see. But people have a hard time thinking of learning without pain.
true. Yeah, there are different sides to that, because as a student, it's just nice to know how much time do I need to reserve for this course, right? And then on the other side, it's also just because we are so trained in thinking like that.
I understand what you're saying, but
Yeah,
even that, I think, is part of the sadomasochistic system that most of us have been educated in. I don't know if in your country it's the same, but certainly where I live, there's a lot of sadomasochism in learning and teaching
absolutely.
and parenting.
Absolutely. It actually does dawns on me that that's why I also wanted to. Now, I texted it to you before we are meeting on here, but I wanted to make a point that I'm reading your books slowly. I'm taking my time because another way, and what I have been doing when I've interviewed in Danish for many years, I've been so stressed about it. I mean, I need to have finished this book. I need to have done it, and so I put so much pressure on myself. And when I started to care for my soul, to care more for me, I realized that I cannot put that pressure on myself. It's not healthy for me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You just say, just keep saying no, or, give excuses or something where you are not You're not going to let yourself be put under a great deal of pressure, pain, or judgment.
Yeah, it's like, how do you want to live your life, right? And I want to do these interviews, but then I have to do it in a way that even I have to dare to disappoint you, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. It's the same for me. I write books mainly. That's my main thing. I do other things like therapy and teaching, but mainly I write books. That's my main thing. And if I couldn't do them with a great deal of pleasure, I couldn't do it. But I can. I find a
Yeah.
great deal of pleasure and I do them in my own way. I write what I want. And fortunately, as I said, I have an agent and publishers that are willing to go along with it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense too. So it's the same thing, but it's doing it in a pleasurable way, in a way that
That's right.
brings you
That's the whole
pleasure.
point. That's right. And I think that's what Ficino said, going back to him. He says that he put on the wall where he taught his students, he put the saying in Latin, latus in praesens, which means pleasure in the present
Yeah.
or pleasure now, like pleasure now, not later, pleasure now.
It's so, it seems simple, but it's so important and it's so far from at least what I'm used to. Yeah.
Oh, yes, for sure.
So I wanted to have this little section talking about your birth chart a little bit, and
Yeah, sure.
yeah, and looking at also James Hillman, who was a friend of yours, right?
James Hillman, a very close friend of mine, yes, for
Yeah.
38 years, a long time.
Wow.
And I spent quite a bit of time with him in the 1980s, where we were living in the same city, doing a lot of work together. And then before he died, for the couple of years before he died, I spent quite a bit of time with him then too. But then we were always in correspondence.
Yeah. So you're somehow in contact.
Yes.
It's yeah, it's just my astrology teacher always say that we are part of nature. I'm sure you that's also what you say, that we are part of nature, and nature seeks balance, he says, which means that we meet people that we need and they need us. And Hillman, he brings the fire. If you're talking about your charts now, right? So in terms of elements, he brings a lot of fire, which
Yeah.
is initiative and self-directive, creative energy. And then you bring the earth to this relationship, meaning that you can fix things and you have good taste and you have a talent to create. So that's just like the overall thing of the elements, but
Yes. Mhm.
but
And that was certainly the way he and I were, that
really,
he was very fiery and strong, very strong and forceful. And he worked, he always said that he did a lot of his work from anger, that he
yes.
was, and that Mars thing was very strong. And I am just the opposite, really. Just the opposite. We were opposites. And
But no, sorry.
at times it was difficult in that aspect of our relationship, but it didn't really affect it very deeply.
Right. Okay, so it is opposite because he was an Aries and you are Libra. So it's
Yes.
completely opposite suns. You also have opposite Venus, opposite Saturns, opposite Junos. So but
Yeah.
then as a Libra, actually you really like and crave the opposition to you, in order to find more of yourself. Can you recognize that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
In fact, yes, he was able to accomplish a lot of things for me that I couldn't do myself.
great. Great. Yeah, I've written a bunch of notes on your chart. I'm not sure how important it is right now, but I think what we really feel and connect to in your books is, well, it's all of you, of course, but it's also in particular, I'm noticing that you have Mercury in the 12th house in Scorpio. So in that sentence we just said, the way that you communicate, also the way that you navigate at all in life, but also like what you actually write. It has to do with and it's in the 12th house, so it has to do with our relationship to existence,
Yeah.
and it touches collective consciousness, and in Scorpio it has to do with these secrets of the soul
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
magic. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Um, and I feel all of that in me, that I'm interested in, I have that Libran quality of being able to identify with everything,
Yeah.
and and uh, and not to be really not to be caught in battles. That's not the way I work. Hillman worked in fights and battles. I never worked that way. And I try to tell people sometimes when they want me to be more fiery, that I say, look, I've been effective as I need to be in my life,
Yeah.
in my own way. I don't need to be something that I'm not.
So what, this is a big question, of course, but can you say something about what did he inspire you to take in as your own work too, that came from him?
Um, well, I met him first through correspondence. He was living in Switzerland, and I was living in the United States, going to school in Syracuse University. And he would send me articles he was writing. And what I found is the quality I found in his work was, and I've felt it ever since, I mean, ever after, was that he would pick up some idea, some issue that people talked and talked about in the same way. And he would completely flip it upside down. He
Hmm.
would be able to see it in an entirely different way.
Hmm.
And I was always astounded. I attended many of his lectures, and, and they always shocked me and astounded me because he didn't go after anything in the conventional way, but he was able to really, in a very articulate and researched way, in history at least, um, go take up something and show it, reveal it in a way we had never thought of it before. And that thing that we call that, and we call that Hermes. You might call it the Mercury.
Mercury,
It's
yeah. Yeah.
it's a way. It's the way of doing things. It's
Mm.
not so much the substance, but the way you work.
Mm.
And it was that
Right.
certainly, the Jungian psychology has never really. I mean, I've gained a great deal from it, but I never wanted to be a Jungian. He was more Jungian than I ever was.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the way he was able to. Hillman was able to turn things inside out, you might say, so that you could see them fresh
Mm-hmm.
as something new and exciting. And he did that all constantly, constantly. He not only did it in his talks, whenever we'd go out to dinner or to go for a walk or something, he would do it. He was never not doing it. And I love that about him. He talked about walking your talk. This was going on a walk, talking about
Yeah.
what he does. And I love that about him.
Amazing. Yeah.
And even though he was very forceful and I wasn't, that's not my way, we seemed to get along fine in those opposites.
Yeah, you have a great synastry, I'll say, great compatibility, because yeah, it's like I don't remember right now because I don't have the chart in front of me, but he's, so you have your south node in Aries, for example, so his sun is right there, and to me, in my terminology, that means that you have connections prior to this
I
incarnation.
see.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um.
I might say too, at the end of his life, he called me once on the
Really.
phone,
Hmm.
and he said, "Would you officiate at my funeral?" Because we knew at that time that he was dying, that he had no chance to survive his cancer. And I said to him, I said, "Jim, I said, you're Jewish.
Oh.
I'm Catholic,
Uh,
more or less."
uh,
And I said, "Are you sure you don't want a Jewish rabbi or a rabbi to be at your service? He said, no. He said, I want you. And so that meant a great deal to me. And it was, again, these two opposite people recognizing something in each other.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Recognizing something in each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Thomas, I just wanted to wrap up the thing that we're talking about, if it's possible at all. But so I've called it necessary madness, and you also call it divine madness, and maybe we should just make a comment on what that actually is. It's partly what we've talking about, that it's so under evaluated in our culture, imagination is, and so it looks like you can easily look insane if you start talking about your dreams or something just a little bit different. So that's one part of it. But I'm just curious to hear your reflections on divine madness.
Well, I get that idea from Plato, and then the Platonists all down in history have repeated that. Ficino wrote a book based on Plato's ideas of love, and in it he has a section on the madness and 4 different ways of being mad. I hope I can remember them. I usually have a list in front of me. I don't remember them, but one of them I can tell you for sure is love. He
Right.
says that when you fall in love with someone, you are entering a madness, or today we might call it an illusion. But it's illusion means to be in play. It's like to be in play somewhere. You're off playing at something, an illusion, and it's a madness. It's a mania in a way. The Plato's word was mania. So, but it's okay because it's something we don't take people to a hospital because they've fallen in love. There's nothing wrong with them. They don't need a therapist. They just have to go through that in life and take care they don't make any big mistakes.
Yeah, that's that's the issue. Yeah, that's the erotic madness, right? Because
Erotic
I
madness,
have
yes.
them here actually. Then I can help you just
Good.
saying the title. Prophetic madness. We did talk about that.
We did to some extent. So in order to really be prophetic, you have to leave your rational mind and try to be in a place where you have access to the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I think somewhere you write something about if you can suspend your logical mind for a little while, then see what happens with that image you're looking at. That's my articulation of something in the book.
Oh, yes, I think you're absolutely right. Yes.
And then I'm not sure I can pronounce this. Sacerdotal madness?
Sacerdotal. Yeah,
Yeah.
that means priestly, actually, that
Okay.
word.
Yeah.
But I think what he means is a kind of spiritual or religious madness. So in order to, when a person, let's say a person prays, really prays deeply, that's a madness in a sense. It's like you're leaving your rational realm to do something that is not so rational. When people, like a contemporary person might see people praying and think, well, that's silly because that's not going to do any good. But if you're in that place where you can pray, that means that you are able to enter that particular kind of mania that is not rational, but still you trust and have faith in it. And this really separates the modern person from a soulful person, because the soulful person is happy to go into these mad places. And there's another one is
It,
artistic.
it's a poetic.
Oh, poetic or artistic, yeah. So to be an artist or a poet requires inspiration. You have to be in a place where you can do that inspiration and be inspired to do your work. I know as a writer, if I can't be in a particular frame of mind where I am inspired, might as well forget it.
Yeah.
But I can get to that place often enough. So when I write, I don't write from a highly rational place. I write from that madness.
You write from madness. I like that.
Yeah.
So a point around divine madness, around these 4 types, is that at least that what's Ficino saying, right? That we have them inside of us.
We do. We have all those potential. I think today, even a modern person living in the modern world understands, many people do in their own way, that they can't be so rational, so clear in their work, like a musician. Musician knows that you have to be able to play the music from a place where you're not so much in control, where the music takes over you.
Yeah,
And
like
they
that.
understand that. The musician understands that.
Right, right. Yeah, so that kind of, yeah, just like going with the flow and letting go
Yes, exactly.
on something in yourself.
Going into the flow is a kind of Plato Platonic madness for sure.
Okay, I have a last question. I'm discussing
Okay.
with myself. Last question.
Okay.
um, and it's not a yes or no question, even though it sounds like that. You can just expand on it, right? But is it like that the ego wants safety? It's that part in us that wants safety, and then you can say the soul is what wants expansion, and then that's kind of the internal battle in us. Can you say something to nuance that, maybe?
I think I know your question. Um, well, first of all, it makes me think of what another thing James Hillman said. He said that the ego is a fantasy. It's not a thing. It's shaped by a particular complex or fantasy. So there might be there's a big heroic ego, he says, in culture where people feel that to be a real person, you have to overcome obstacles and you have to deal with the world as an enemy or as a threat or something like that. Then you are the hero going to fix it. So that what you were describing was the ego as, um, how did you put it?
Yeah, more
You
like
know,
the thing that's blocking you from being a hero in a way, like the safety, the ones that want.
yeah, the safety thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that could be for you. It all depends. The ego differs then from
Okay.
person to person. So your ego, that means the I you identify with, your identity and the way you habitually do things, uh, might be affected by uh, this fantasy of safety, that you need safety.
Right.
And a lot of people, all of us probably have that to some extent, but it may not be the dominant one. You could be heroic in some areas and you could be looking for safety in others. So it's not so simple. But I think that the ego is, I think it's a mistake. I agree with Hillman that to think of the ego as this function that you have that is not influenced by your history and by your the way you see the world. So I think that if we could look at, I think it's very interesting and important if we could look at the sense of I, who am I?
Yeah.
My I is so influenced by the story, the narrative that I'm in.
Yes.
What is my story? And some of that story might be clarified by looking at my childhood to see what stories were imposed upon me or were given to me, and how that story developed over time with influences from a bigger world and changes in your experience. And maybe you've shifted to a different story, or maybe that story remains in the background. So we are, I think, made of many narratives, and not just one, but there tends to be a dominant one that affects so much of what we do.
So that's what we are conditioned to do. Is that what you're saying? We're conditioned to think we're like this.
Conditioned only in the sense that see, I'm trying to use different words. I'm
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
trying to use words like condition.
Okay.
I'm trying to use words like poetic words, like narrative, like story. And so I'm trying to say it's much better to think of it as I'm in this story and to think of it more artistically and poetically than to think of it as this conditioning, which is, kind of a force on you. With a story, at least, it's a story. If you can see the story of your life, you can move in and out of it and you have some objectivity in relation to it. And you might be able to even change it, what
Yes.
story that you're going to live. So I think that's is the point. In an imaginal psychology, we look for the narratives and not the operations that are going to affect us. The narratives, the story, the images, that's what we're looking for.
Right. I like that. I'm happy that I have so much more reading to do. And again, I'm emphasizing this because in another life, if you will, in another story, I would have said, "Oh, I have so much reading to do." Right now, I'm like saying, there's so much pleasure in reading you, and I want to give you this last compliment that it's about the soul, but it's also appealing to my soul the way that you are um, articulating what you're saying, like the way this, even just small sentences I have to read again and again because it's so spot on. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I do try to have my writing fit the subject. I really work at that. Writing is very writing. The art of writing is very important to me.
Right. Yeah. So inspiring. Thank you so much, Thomas More. I don't want to take more of your time. I know you have a lecture to
Well,
get to.
I'm just a little too busy at this time in my life, I'm afraid. I wish I could just say that we had lots of time,
Yeah,
but
what's going on with that? That you're just still going. You're still going strong.
uh, I am. I'm not where other people might retire at this point in life. I find that, I, well, a few years ago, things were slowing down, but in the past few years, there's so much happening. I can't keep up with it.
We need you. That's what's happening. We need someone like you who speaks about this in
Thank
such a
you.
clear
Thank you.
way. In such a clear way, we can feel it.
Well, thank you for the excellent questions. We have so much in common in terms of our ideas that it's so easy to talk. We could go on and on.
That's so sweet of you. Thank you. Yes. So have a really great day and all the best. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.